He had not said a woman's name out loud. Not like that, not with intention, in 6 years. Not since the hospital, not since the Tuesday morning when the world reorganized itself into before and after, and he had driven home alone in a car that still smelled like her shampoo. But here he was, standing in the parking lot of a diner on Route 9 with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the name written in his phone like a password he hadn't decided whether to use yet, Claudette. That was all he had, a name, a time, and the memory of his coworker Jerome saying, "Trust me on this one, I wouldn't send you somewhere you didn't need to go." The thing Jerome didn't know, couldn't know, because Gareth had never told him, was that his 7-year-old son had been in the kitchen when Jerome called, and Teddy had that particular stillness children use when they're listening to everything, while appearing to listen to nothing. Gareth found out how much Teddy had heard 2 hours later. He'd been standing at the kitchen counter eating a bowl of cereal for dinner, which was something he did more than he should have, when Teddy appeared in the doorway holding something with both hands. A folded piece of paper, yellow construction paper, the kind from the art bin in the closet, creased with the seriousness of someone who had considered the geometry of it carefully. He set it on the counter between them without a word, and then backed up 2 steps and waited. Gareth looked at the paper. He looked at Teddy. He picked up the paper. "Open it when you get there," Teddy said. Not before. He was 7 years old, and he said it the way a person says something they've already decided is non-negotiable. Gareth put the paper in his jacket pocket. He hadn't planned to go on the date. He hadn't planned most of the things his life had become in the years since Miriam died. He hadn't planned to become the person who knew exactly which drawer the school permission slips went in, or the only person on earth who could locate Teddy's library book within 45 seconds of being asked. He hadn't planned to become the kind of father who attended every single curriculum night and sat in the small plastic chairs and took notes, not because he thought anyone was watching, but because he didn't know what else to do with his hands in the rooms where he used to bring 2 cups of coffee and now only brought 1. He had not planned any of it. He had just kept showing up. That was the whole of his strategy, and it had worked, in the way that things work when the bar is survival and you're willing to meet it every day. Jerome had been patient about the date. That was the right word. Patient, the way Jerome handled everything, with a kind of steady warmth that never tipped over into pressure, even when it was clearly pressure. He'd mentioned it first back in September. By December, he'd mentioned it 4 more times. Each time Gareth had declined in a different way, and Jerome had accepted each refusal with the ease of someone who was playing a long game and knew it. He'd won on a Wednesday in the copy room when Gareth was thinking about something else. One dinner, Jerome had said, "She's a good person, Gareth, a really good person. That's all I can tell you, because that's all you need." Gareth had said he'd think about it, which they both understood to mean yes. He thought about it for 11 days. He thought about it every time he drove past Route 9 and saw the diner's sign. He thought about it on Thursday evenings when Teddy was at his grandmother's, and the house was so quiet it made his ears ring. He had 6 years of practice at not thinking about things he needed to think about, and this thing defeated him anyway. He confirmed the dinner on a Sunday, told Jerome. Did not tell Teddy. Teddy found out the way Teddy found out everything, by being 7 and paying closer attention than anyone gave him credit for. He'd been at the table with his colored pencils when Jerome called back to confirm the time, and by the time Gareth hung up and turned around, Teddy was looking at him with an expression that was very difficult to describe to someone who had never raised a child, but which Gareth would have called, if pressed, knowing. "You have a date," Teddy said. "It's just dinner. With a lady." "With a person," Gareth said, which was technically accurate and practically useless. Teddy went back to his drawing. He didn't ask anything else that night, and Gareth made the mistake of thinking that was the end of it. The night of the dinner, Gareth changed his shirt 3 times. He stood in front of his closet with the particular expression of a person who has realized too late that all his clothes were bought for a version of his life that no longer existed. He had work clothes, and he had clothes he wore to be a father in, and the overlap between those categories was not small, but what he was looking for, something that said, "I am a person capable of a normal human evening," seemed to be missing entirely. He had settled on a gray button-down when Teddy appeared in the doorway. Teddy studied him for a moment. "That one," he said, pointing to the blue flannel Gareth had already rejected. "I already looked at that one. It's better." "How is it better?" Teddy considered this with what appeared to be genuine thought. "It doesn't look like you're trying too hard." Gareth put on the blue flannel. He was tying his shoes at the door when Teddy came down the hall at a pace that was almost casual but not quite. He handed Gareth the yellow folded paper. He'd been holding it behind his back. "What's this?" "It's for later." "What's in it?" Teddy's expression was patient in a way that was slightly exhausting. "That's why it's for later, Dad." "Am I allowed to know when later is?" "When it feels right," Teddy said. "How will I know when it feels right?" "You'll know." He said it with the absolute certainty of someone who had never spent 6 years doubting himself. Gareth put the paper in his jacket pocket. Teddy walked him to the door, which was something he had started doing the year before, for reasons Gareth had never entirely understood, and which he had never asked about, because some things you didn't examine if you wanted them to keep happening. At the door, Teddy wrapped both arms around Gareth's middle and pressed his face into his jacket for 3 seconds. Then he stepped back. "Don't overthink it," he said. His grandmother Ruth was already on her way. She lived 12 minutes away and had never once arrived late in her life, which was something Teddy appreciated and Gareth depended on. He drove to the diner with the paper sitting in his pocket and his hands tighter on the wheel than they needed to be. He arrived 4 minutes early, which was a mistake. 4 minutes early meant 4 minutes of standing in a parking lot with nothing to do but be aware of what he was doing. He stood near the entrance and tried to occupy the space with some confidence, and did not succeed particularly well. The sign for the diner buzzed faintly above him. The traffic on Route 9 moved at the ordinary indifferent pace of traffic everywhere. He was not someone who did this. He was someone who came home at the same time every day and made the same 7 dinners in rotation, and read the same chapter of the same book 3 nights in a row before he'd retain it. He was a person of grooves and repetition, not because he lacked imagination, but because grooves had gotten him here, and here was a place where his son was fed and warm and cared for. He did not take that lightly. He did not take any of it lightly. This, standing in a parking lot waiting for a person he didn't know, was not a groove. This was something else entirely. He saw her before she saw him. She was coming from the far end of the parking lot, moving quickly. The kind of quickly that suggested she'd been circling for a parking spot longer than she expected. Her coat was unbuttoned despite the cold. She was carrying a tote bag over one shoulder, and she was scanning the entrance in a way that was just barely not anxious, the way a person looks when they're managing their anxiety, rather than not having it. When she saw him, something in her pace changed. Not slower. She didn't slow down. It was more like a small recalibration, a settling. The way a compass needle stops its trembling and finds north. Gareth held the door. She walked through and turned to him, and she was catching her breath slightly from the walk, and he was about to say something. His own name, he thought, was probably the right starting point, when her expression changed. She looked at his chest, or just below it. He didn't understand what she was looking at, and then he did. The edge of the yellow paper was sticking out of his jacket pocket. A half-inch of construction paper, visible above the pocket's edge. He hadn't noticed. She looked at it for just a moment. Then she looked at him, and something moved through her face that was careful and considered and private, and then she said, quietly, "In the space between them, a kid made that for you." It wasn't a question. Gareth's hand went to the paper automatically, pressing it back down. His throat did something that was not useful in a restaurant. It was the way she said it, not with pity, not with performance, just as a plain statement of recognition, the way you'd identify something you'd seen before and understood completely. "How did you know?" he said. She smiled, small and a little uncertain. "The fold," she said. "Kids fold things differently, with their whole hand. Like the paper needs to be convinced to stay." They were seated at a corner table. It was the kind of corner that restaurants gave to people who needed a little room, and Gareth was grateful for it. Her name was Sylvie. Jerome had told him that much and nothing else. She had arrived with her coat still open, one button misaligned on the inside panel, a strand of dark hair across her cheek that she hadn't fixed. She fixed it when they sat down. She looked briefly at the table the way someone looks when they're doing a quiet accounting of where they are and what they've agreed to. "I shouldn't have said that," she said, "about the paper. It was a strange thing to lead with." "It was," Gareth agreed. She laughed. It was short and genuine and slightly embarrassed, and the table between them felt smaller than it had a moment before. He told her about Teddy. Not all of it. He was not a person who gave all of anything on the first pass. But enough. That he was 7. That he had strong opinions about the correct way to draw a horse. That he had handed Gareth the yellow paper in the doorway with the gravity of someone transmitting classified information. Sylvie listened the way some people listen, with her full face, not filling the pauses. "Can I see it?" she asked. He said, "Only if it feels right." She nodded, accepting this entirely, which somehow made Gareth feel better about having obeyed a 7-year-old's instructions. He reached into his pocket and took out the paper. The fold was precise in the way Teddy did everything. The crease white with effort, the corners aligned. He opened it on the table with the care of something that might not survive careless handling. It was a drawing in orange crayon. 2 figures. They were seated at a table, round faces, small curved lines for smiles. Teddy had given them both coffee cups, because Teddy associated restaurants with coffee. Below the drawing, in the large effortful lettering of a child who is pressing down hard because the message is important. She might be sad too. Be nice to her. Gareth sat with it. The corner of the paper moved faintly with his breathing. He was aware that his throat had done something inconvenient, and that this was a diner in New Jersey, and that there was a woman he didn't know watching him from across a table. "He's 7, he said, which was not a complete sentence but seemed necessary to say. "How long has it been the 2 of you?" 6 years. He folded the drawing back slowly along Teddy's original creases. Since he was 1. Sylvie didn't do the thing. The tilted head, the soft eyes, the tone that arrived slightly ahead of whatever people said when they felt sorry for you. She just nodded, the nod of someone receiving information and filing it plainly, without performance. "I'm sorry," she said. And then, because she clearly understood what it meant to have someone say the right thing at the wrong volume, she said nothing else. They ordered. The dinner found its rhythm the way conversations do when both people are, despite everything, actually interested. He learned that she worked in school administration, that she'd moved to this part of Jersey from upstate New York 3 years ago after her own particular reorganization of before and after, that she took her coffee with exactly 1 sugar and felt strongly about it. She learned that he was a structural engineer, that he drove the same truck he'd had since before Teddy was born, because it had never given him a reason to trade it. That he had learned through a combination of YouTube and stubbornness how to get crayon off a microwave door. "How long did that take?" 2 evenings and a minor crisis, Gareth said. Teddy supervised. She smiled. "He sounds like he's got strong project management instincts. He runs a tighter ship than I do." Somewhere between the food and the moment the server offered dessert, Gareth found himself looking at her across the table and thinking about her coat. The misaligned button. The hair she'd fixed when they sat down. She'd arrived imperfect, and she'd composed herself since, and the composure was real. But it was chosen. She was working at it, which meant the version of her that had walked across that parking lot with her coat open in the cold was the version that had shown up anyway, in whatever condition that required. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You've been asking me things all night. This one's different." He moved his coffee cup slightly to the left, which was not useful, but gave his hand something to do. "When you saw the paper, you said it right away. Most people would have kept that to themselves." She was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant she was deciding not whether to answer, but how much of the answer to give. She reached into her tote bag and took out her wallet. It was canvas, worn at the corners from use. She opened it and removed something folded. But this was an older fold, The kind where the paper had been opened and refolded so many times the crease had gone pale, and the paper itself had taken on the color of something that had lived inside something else for a very long time. She set it on the table between them. Gareth leaned in. It was a drawing in pencil, not crayon. Pencil, the lines more uncertain but no less careful. 2 figures. One of them was curled slightly, arms around its own knees. The other was standing beside it, one hand extended, touching the first figure's shoulder. Below the drawing, in small block letters that were young but deliberate, "I see you. I'm not going anywhere." "My nephew drew that for me," Sylvie said. "He was 8. I was going through something, a divorce. And I kept telling everyone I was fine, and he didn't argue with me about it. He just drew me a picture and put it in my coat pocket when I wasn't looking." She looked at the drawing. "I found it on the train. I cried for 15 minutes in front of a complete stranger." Gareth said nothing. He knew exactly the shape of the gesture. The gap between not being able to fix something and refusing to do nothing. It was a shape he recognized, the way you recognize a word in another language that you never learned but somehow already knew. "I've kept it in my wallet since," she said. 7 years. I stopped counting after a while." She picked it up and tucked it back into place. "When I saw the paper in your pocket, I didn't think about it. I just knew what it was." The server came and went. Neither of them said yes to dessert. The thing she hadn't said yet was sitting in the room between them, and Gareth was aware of it the way you're aware of a sound you can't quite identify. Present, real, not alarming, but there. And then she said it. "I almost didn't come." He looked at her. "I drove past the exit twice," she said. "Got off, went back, sat in the car in the parking lot for 20 minutes. I had a very complete list of reasons why this was a bad idea." "What changed?" She glanced toward her bag. "I opened my wallet to look for my parking ticket, and I saw the drawing. And I thought," she paused, "my nephew drew that because he didn't want me to feel like I was alone in something that was hard. And I thought," another pause, smaller this time, "coming here was hard. I figured maybe that still counted." Gareth held this for a moment, the low sound of the diner around them. A family in the corner with 2 loud kids. The server refilling someone's coffee 3 tables away. "I sat in the parking lot for 8 minutes before I came in," Gareth said. She looked at him. "Engine running," he said. "Hands on the wheel." Something moved through her expression. Small, brief, like a door opening somewhere else in the house. "We're both ridiculous," she said. "We're both something." They walked out into the cold at 9:51. The parking lot had thinned out. Their breath showed in the air in small, pale clouds that disappeared before they could become anything. They stood on the blacktop the way people stand when an evening is ending, and neither person is sure how to mark it. Gareth knew the shape of this moment. He'd imagined some version of it, vaguely and reluctantly, every day for the past 2 weeks. He'd imagined it as a handshake, a polite conclusion. Something that would allow him to drive home and put this in whatever folder of his mind held the things that had been acceptable, but hadn't changed anything. Sylvie reached into her tote bag. She took out her wallet, and from it the drawing, the old one, the pencil one, the one with 7 years of wear along the crease. She held it out toward him. "I want you to keep this." Gareth looked at it in her hand. "That's yours, I know." She kept her hand extended. "I kept it because I needed a reminder that I'd been seen when I felt invisible. I don't feel that way like I used to." Something moved briefly through her expression. "I think you and your son might understand what it's for better than I do right now." He took it. The paper was lighter than it looked, and holding it felt like holding something that had been carried a long time, which it had. He stood on the blacktop with a stranger's most important thing in his hand, and he had something he wanted to say that was true and specific and equal to what she'd just done, and what came out instead was, "Thank you. This was really good." She smiled, and it was real, which somehow made it worse. "It was," she said. She turned and walked toward her car. Gareth turned in the other direction and walked toward his truck, which was parked near the road. He counted his steps without deciding to. 1, 3, 6, 9. He stopped. He stood on the blacktop with the drawing in his hand and her footsteps fading behind him, and he understood, with the clarity of something he'd been trying not to know for 6 years, exactly what was happening. He had done this before, not with Sylvie. He'd never met Sylvie before tonight. But with this moment, with the version of this moment that had arrived and then passed, in different shapes, more times than he'd acknowledged. The moment when something possible appeared, and he found a way to let it keep moving. He was good at that. He had built an entire life out of that particular skill. He would go home. He would check on Teddy. He would put the drawing on the counter, and the specificity of tonight. Her misaligned button, the wallet she'd opened on a parking ticket, the way she'd said "I see you" when she read the paper. All of that would soften over the next week into something general, and then into nothing, and that would be it. The footsteps behind him were almost gone. He turned around. She was 20 feet away, walking with her chin down against the cold. Sylvie. She stopped. She turned. The distance between them was 20 feet, and also Gareth understood. Something considerably larger that he was choosing right now whether to cross. He didn't tell her everything he'd almost done. Not standing in a parking lot in November, but he walked back toward her and they stood together for a few more minutes, and he asked if she'd want to get coffee sometime. Yes, she said. He said he'd call. She said okay. She looked at him like she believed him, which was, given the previous 90 seconds, more than he deserved. He drove home with both pieces of paper on the passenger seat. Ruth let herself out when he came through the door. She had a key. She'd insisted on it 3 years ago, and Gareth had given up pretending to object. She looked at him in the way Ruth looked at everything, direct and complete. And he gave her a look that meant later, and she nodded and put on her coat and left. The house was the way it always was after Teddy went to sleep. Quiet in the specific shape of him. A half-finished Lego thing on the coffee table. A library book left open and face down on the couch. One sock in the hallway with no paired sock visible anywhere in the immediate area. Gareth picked up the sock. He turned off the living room light. He sat down on the floor in the hallway outside Teddy's room, back against the wall, knees up, and he put both pieces of paper on the floor in front of him. He looked at them for a long time. Teddy's drawing on the right, orange crayon, 2 figures at a table, 2 coffee cups, the shy curved smiles that weren't quite sure of themselves. Below it, in letters pressed hard enough to leave a ridge in the paper. She might be sad too. Be nice to her. The other drawing on the left, older, softer, the pencil lines faded, but there. One figure curled in on itself. One figure standing beside it with a hand on its shoulder. Below, "I see you. I'm not going anywhere." 2 drawings. 2 children who'd never met, years apart, miles apart, every kind of apart. And they had ended up here on his hallway floor, saying the same thing in the same language. He thought about what Sylvie had said, that she'd kept the drawing, because she needed to remember that someone had seen her when she felt invisible. He thought about his 8 minutes in the parking lot, and the 9 steps he'd taken in the wrong direction before he turned around. And he thought about the question he couldn't stop circling. Not about Sylvie, who was plainly a good person, but about himself, about whether 6 years of building something sufficient and stable and self-contained had left him any room for something that was uncertain and unscheduled and real, in the way that things were real when they could also hurt you. He was 39 years old. He had a son who put folded paper in jacket pockets because he believed in kindness as a practical technology for improving situations. And he had spent 6 years being exactly enough for the life in front of him, without once asking whether he was allowed to want more than enough. The question sat in the hallway. It had weight. Teddy's door was open 2 inches, the exact amount Teddy required, measured and enforced every night with patience and precision. Through the gap came the slow, even sound of his breathing, deep in whatever world 7-year-olds went to when they slept. In a few hours he would wake up and want waffles and want to know everything, and Gareth would tell him some of it, and Teddy would fill in the rest from his own imagination, which was more detailed and more vivid than most things Gareth could offer anyway. He picked up both drawings and held one in each hand. He had been so busy being careful that he had almost missed the fact that the answer had been in his pocket the whole time. He didn't have to wait until morning. He heard it before he expected to, a small sound from behind Teddy's door, then quiet, Then the particular soft landing of feet on a hardwood floor. A pause. Then the door swung open, and Teddy appeared in the gap, squinting against the hall light, wearing the pajamas with the yellow stars. His hair was flattened on the left side from the pillow. He looked at Gareth sitting on the floor with the expression children use when adults are doing something inexplicable, but not alarming. He came and sat down next to him without being asked, leaning into his arm. Gareth wrapped his arm around him without thinking about it. Teddy looked at the 2 pieces of paper on the floor. He picked up his own, examined it, set it back down with the seriousness it deserved. Then he picked up the other one, the old one, the one he'd never seen, and held it with both hands. He looked at the figures. He read the letters below. He set it down carefully. "Is she still sad?" he asked. His voice was still soft with sleep. No scaffolding, no approach, just the question offered plainly, the way Teddy offered almost everything. Gareth looked at the 2 drawings in front of him. "No," he said. "I don't think so." Teddy nodded, once, with the satisfaction of someone confirming something they already believed. He stayed pressed against Gareth's side for a little while longer. Then he stood up, padded back to his room, and pulled the door to exactly 2 inches. Gareth sat in the hallway a few more minutes. Then he got up, put both drawings on the kitchen counter next to each other, and went to sleep. He called Sylvie the next day. They talked for 45 minutes. He called 3 days after that, and they talked longer. The first time the 3 of them were in the same place, Gareth was more frightened than he'd been in the parking lot, which surprised him. He'd managed the parking lot. He'd turned around on the blacktop. He'd made the calls. And yet, standing in the grass at Millbrook Park on a Saturday morning, in late November, watching Sylvie's car come around the far turn of the lot, he felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with him. Teddy was beside him in his red jacket and his sneakers, which had a small drawn rocket on each toe, because he'd decided in September they needed improving and had improved them with a Sharpie. He was not, for once, talking. He was watching the car. Sylvie got out. She was wearing a green coat. She had a thermos and a canvas bag, and the expression of someone managing the effort of not looking like they were managing the effort. She and Gareth exchanged a look across the distance that contained, without words, most of what they'd spent the past 3 weeks saying to each other. Then they both looked at Teddy. Teddy looked at Sylvie. Sylvie did not crouch down to his level. Gareth noticed this and was grateful, because Teddy found that particular gesture condescending in a way he had once described with considerable precision. Sylvie also didn't speak first. She stood with her thermos and her bag and let Teddy take whatever measure he needed to take. Teddy was thorough. He looked at her face. He looked at the bag, which had a small embroidered compass on it, which Teddy clocked with visible interest, then back to her face. "Hi," Teddy said. "Hi," Sylvie said. That was all for the moment. They walked the path that looped around the east end of the park. Sylvie and Gareth talked easily, the kind of easy they'd built over phone calls, the kind that had been earned. Teddy walked slightly ahead, kicking through the wet leaves that had collected along the edge of the path, occupied with whatever internal project occupied him when he appeared to be doing nothing. Gareth kept half his attention on him the way he always did, the particular frequency you stay tuned to, even when you're looking somewhere else. They found a spot near the pond and settled on the low stone wall that bordered it. Sylvie opened her bag and took out a small sketchbook, the spiral-bound kind, and a pencil. Gareth hadn't known she sketched. He watched her open it without comment, and she didn't offer one. She just started drawing. Teddy lasted approximately 2 minutes before he migrated closer. He did it in increments. He moved toward things that interested him the same way he moved toward most things he wasn't ready to officially want. Sideways in stages, with pauses that were supposed to look casual. Gareth watched this from the edge of his vision and said nothing. Sylvie kept drawing. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the small presence materializing at her shoulder. The pencil moved at an easy pace, certain about what it was doing. Teddy looked at the sketchbook. A figure was taking shape on the page. Small, deliberate. A boy in a jacket with something drawn on his sneakers, standing near water. Teddy went very still. Sylvie finished the figure, She considered it, head tilted slightly. Then she held the sketchbook toward Teddy, not pushing it at him, just making it available. "That you?" she asked. Teddy stared at the page. The figure had his jacket, his sneakers with the rockets on the toes. The way he stood with his weight shifted slightly to one side. It was him, rendered in 4 minutes by someone who had been paying attention to him before he knew he was being paid attention to. He took the sketchbook from her. He held it the way he held his own drawings, properly, with both hands, with the full weight of consideration it deserved. He examined the figure for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and took out, because he was Teddy, and therefore constitutionally incapable of being without them, 3 colored pencils held together with a hair tie. He chose one, the dark green. He'd been calling it forest green since October, with an authority that Gareth had not questioned. He drew beside his own figure, not over it, beside it. A second figure, taller, standing close. He gave it a coat. He gave it a thermos. He drew the compass bag carefully hanging from the shoulder. When he was done, he held the sketchbook out from his face, the way he always assessed his own work, from a slight distance, taking the full measure. Then he held it out to Sylvie. She took it. The 2 figures stood on the page together. One drawn in pencil, one added in forest green, different hands, different pressures, different moments in time. But together, Gareth was looking at the pond. He was looking at the pond because if he looked at either of them, something was going to happen in his face that he preferred to manage privately. Sylvie's voice, when it came, was quieter than usual. "She's not standing alone anymore," she said. Teddy looked at the drawing for a moment. "That's what I was going for," he said. They stayed at the park until the light went flat and the cold came in with purpose. On the path back to the parking lot, Teddy walked between them, not touching either of them, but close enough that when the path narrowed, he stepped naturally to Sylvie's side. When she shifted her bag to her other shoulder, he reached up and took her free hand with the simple matter-of-factness of someone doing a thing that was already obviously true. Gareth watched this happen and kept walking. At the edge of the lot, where the path opened back out, Teddy looked up at Sylvie. "Are you still sad?" he asked. His voice was the same as it had been in the hallway at midnight. The same plainness, the same complete absence of scaffolding, the same question he'd sent out into the world weeks ago via orange crayon. She might be sad, too, now returned, traveling the distance it had always been meant to travel, arriving at the person it had always been addressed to. Sylvie looked down at him. She took in his face, the steady eyes, the red jacket, the sneakers with their rockets. Something moved through her expression that was too layered to name quickly. Not quite sadness, not quite happiness, but the place where both of those things existed at the same time without canceling each other out. She shook her head. Small, definite, real. Teddy accepted this the way he accepted true things, without requiring it to be said again. He squeezed her hand once, and then let go and ran ahead toward the car because there was a substantial pile of wet leaves near the rear tire, and it would have been irresponsible not to address them. Gareth and Sylvie stood at the edge of the lot and watched him go. He thought about a lot of things in that moment and said none of them, because there was nothing to say that the afternoon hadn't already said more plainly. He thought about a folded piece of yellow paper in a breast pocket, about 2 people with 8 minutes and 20 minutes of doubt between them, about a 7-year-old who had understood something that had taken Gareth 6 years to get within reaching distance of. That you didn't have to be certain before you tried, you just had to be kind. And sometimes, if you were lucky, kindness was the door. Teddy turned and looked back at them from the leaves. "Come on," he called. Sylvie was already walking toward him.